In looking at your professional growth plan here, I know I've been in the classroom several times, been watching, and I noticed that you've outlined here that you'd like to improve and have your expectations be more clear to students. Can you talk to me about that a little bit?
Well, last year I just chose a couple of areas, reading and math, to work on instruction, the Domain 3 instruction element, and I believe it was element 2, and where I needed to inform the students of my expectations. And one way that I had learned to do that by talking to other people is putting I can statements on the board. And you know, since I had first graders, it had to be simple, something that they could understand. So I started putting the I can statement on the board and reading it with the students before the lesson, and then upon completion of the lesson we would reread it and then go on with some type of assessment.
Okay.
And it worked out really well, and then this year I decided to do it for a few more subjects.
Right, I noticed that in your plan that you wanted to extend this out to social studies and science, and I remember last year that was really pleased with what I saw in your classroom, because I really think that it focused the students in reading and math, of course, so critical there in first grade. When I've been in your classroom this year, I've noticed that when I was in September, that I think it was a science lesson that you were doing, and you were talking to the students, and your lesson was very much directed at what was on the board. Your lesson plans always, we've seen them in there. And then when I was back in your room again in early November, I guess, I saw social studies, and the kids were all engaged and directly addressed what your learning outcome was. And I was really impressed at that time, because I talked to a couple of your little guys there in the classroom, and they were able to tell me exactly what they were learning. Exactly what they were learning, and of course it was in their language, because I can't read what's on the board. So I really feel like you've done a really nice job with that. Do you find that it is, I know that, in your conversation was telling me that you were struggling a little bit to get all 4 areas in last year. Do you find it's easier now? Are you finding it yourself coming more naturally to you?
Well, since I did it gradually, taking 2 subjects at a time, that, as I plan now, I have that focus in mind.
Okay.
As I'm looking at, the timeline or, core content or whatever, I keep the goal in mind when I write it down in my lesson plans, and I try to write it in my plan simple, in a simplistic way, so that when it's exactly the way I write it on the board for the kids. And I've been really impressed with how much more they seem to pay attention, and if I don't write the goal on the board, they will remind me to write it, that they look forward to that, and I think it's a point of keeps them all focused, or everybody's ready to start the lesson.
So you see it as a definite benefit.
Yeah, it's been a little bit more work, but it has gotten easier.
Okay. Okay, so in looking at your rubric, I see you brought your rubric with you. What are you thinking for the rest of the year?
Well, I feel like I've made, accomplished a lot with, having clear expectations with the children and letting them know what we're doing. And what I find that I feel like I'm more developing on, is taking the assessment, whether it's an exit slip or a graphic organizer or whatever we do at the end of the lesson, and use that information from the assessment so I can, maybe need to adjust my plans for the next day, or, I'm okay at using it to adjust plans for the following week. But, once your plans are made, I guess I feel like I don't always take the assessment and guide my instruction for the very next day, and sometimes I feel like I need to do that.
Right, so it's a natural outgrowth then of your clear expectations and using the information that you've obtained from your students because of that now you see yourself moving into kind of a different area. It's basically the same, a logical progression, but basically the same thing. Okay, do you want to then identify in the rubric, you want to go ahead and use that and see if you can find out which one of those statements would be most appropriate for where you want to go? Well,
I'm thinking under this element 5, I feel like I frequently, and sometimes not so frequently, use the assessment to guide my instruction. I do as a whole picture, but not on a daily, more or less a daily basis. And I think that maybe, if I can get to the proficient level where it's consistent, then that to me says more daily and weekly basis to use that, instead of just at the beginning of a unit, or after looking at GMAT or grade scores or whatever.
Okay. I agree 100%. I think that that's a really good assessment right there.